The letter arrived in Calico Flats on a Tuesday in October, when the cottonwood leaves had gone the color of old brass and the mornings carried a cold that wouldn't apologize. She had written it herself, in the practical hand of a woman who had learned to write from a school book with a cracked spine. 2 sentences: I can cook, sew, and manage a household. I am not afraid of work or children. She had folded it into an envelope addressed to a name she did not know, care of the postmaster in Calico Flats, Wyoming, in response to a notice pinned to the board at the agency in Laramie that read, Widower, 6 children, needs a capable woman. Room, board, and wages until arrangements can be decided. It had not said anything about love. She appreciated that. She had been in Laramie for 11 months working in a rooming house, washing other people's sheets and rehanging other people's curtains. And she had enough money saved to last her through February if she was careful. She was always careful, but February was not a plan. The stage from Laramie took most of a day and dropped her at the end of a main street that was exactly what she'd expected. A livery, a general store, a saloon with its shutters half open to the cold, a church set slightly apart from everything as if embarrassed by the company, a platform of raw timber planks. A handful of people who were not waiting for the stage, but who watched it arrive anyway, the way people in small towns watch anything that moves. She stepped down with a canvas bag in one hand and a sewing basket in the other, and she stood on the platform and looked at the street. The driver handed down her trunk and drove on without a word. There were 3 women on the far side of the street who had stopped walking when she stepped down. She could feel the calculation from where she stood, the dress, the bag, the fact of her being alone, the math of what all of it added up to. One of them leaned toward another and said something behind her hand. She had been looked at before. She set down her sewing basket and waited. The postmaster's office was at the near end of the street, a narrow building with a painted sign that had faded to the color of smoke. She had been told to present herself there upon arrival, and that arrangements would be made to send word to the ranch. She picked up the basket. She did not know what 6 children looked like precisely, whether they came at you all at once or watched from doorways first. She didn't know what the man looked like, or how long he'd been alone, or what he'd told his children to expect. She knew she could cook. She knew she could manage. She walked toward the postmaster's door, and the 3 women on the far side of the street were still watching. The postmaster was a small man with ink-stained fingers and the kind of face that had spent decades forming no particular expression. He looked at her over the rims of his glasses, looked at the basket, looked back at her. She told him her name. She told him she had come in response to the arrangement. He said yes, he knew, and slid a folded paper across the counter without ceremony, as if she were picking up a parcel. She opened it. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, the way a person writes when they are not accustomed to writing and understand that the words will be read by a stranger. It said the ranch was 4 miles north by the wagon road, that he would send the eldest boy into town at midday to collect her, that there was no need to find accommodation in the meantime, but that she was welcome to wait at the church if she preferred somewhere to sit. It said the children were aged between 4 and 14. It said Sepp had appreciated her willingness to make the journey. It did not say anything else. She folded the paper and put it in the pocket of her coat. The poster was watching her in the way small-town men watched arrivals. Not unkindly, but thoroughly. Long way to come, he said. She agreed that it was. He slid a second piece of paper toward her, smaller, a receipt of some kind. She signed it without reading it, because there was nothing in it that would change anything. Outside, the morning had warmed by a degree or two. The 3 women were gone. In their place, there was only the street, a dog lying at the base of a post, a man loading something into a cart 2 buildings down, the distant sound of a hammer working somewhere above eye level. She walked to the bench outside the general store and sat down with the basket on her knees. 4 miles north, an eldest boy at midday. Children between 4 and 14, which meant a span of a decade, a house with several entirely different stages of need operating at once. She was not afraid of need. She had grown up with it, had learned early that a household ran not on feeling but on the repetition of small, useful acts. She looked at the street, she thought about the letter, appreciated her willingness to make the journey, a careful word, appreciated, not grateful, not relieved. It left room. She put her hand on the lid of the sewing basket. The latch had a small stiffness to it, required a particular angle of pressure to open cleanly. She had repaired it twice, and it kept returning to that same resistance, as if the basket preferred to stay closed. She did not open it. She set both hands flat on the lid and looked at the road that led north out of town. It was 11 in the morning. She had time. A wagon came down the main street from the north, moving slowly, loaded with feed assocks. She watched it pass. The driver did not look at her. Nobody did, which was its own kind of relief. She had been the object of several long glances since stepping off the train, and she had met each one with a stillness she had practiced over years of being looked at in train stations, in boarding houses, in church pews, where a woman alone was a kind of question nobody wanted to leave unanswered. She had answered enough questions for one morning. She stood, shifted the basket to her left hand, and started up the road. The town thinned quickly. 2 blocks of storefront, and then a livery, and then a house with a broken fence, and then open ground. The road narrowing into something that was more suggestion than fact. 2 tracks pressed into the dirt by years of wheel traffic. The grass on either side was dry and pale, the color of old straw. The sky was enormous and nearly white with heat. She walked at an even pace, not hurried. She had never found that hurrying improved anything that mattered. She passed a wooden marker but did not stop to read it. She kept her eyes on the road and let her mind work the way it did when she was deciding something. Not by forcing a conclusion, but by laying the pieces out flat and waiting. The letter had been written in a careful hand, the sentences short and practical. He had listed what was needed: someone who could cook, who could manage the younger ones, who could take on a household without requiring explanation of every task. He had not listed anything about himself. She had noticed that at the time and set it aside. Now she took it out again. A man who describes his need without describing himself is either humble or private, or hiding something. She had known all three. She was not naive about what she was walking toward. A man with 6 children had suffered something. The shape of that suffering she did not know yet. What she knew was that a house with that many young lives in it would have its own weather, its own interior logic, and she would have to learn it, the way you learn any new place, not by asking, but by watching what people reached for first. The road curved slightly, and she saw the property before she saw the house. A fence line, a kitchen garden to the left of it, modest but tended. The rows straight, the stakes driven evenly. Someone had put time into it. She noticed that. Then she saw a boy at the fence, standing very still, watching her come. He was tall for what she guessed was 12 or 13. He had his hands at his sides. He did not wave or call out. She kept walking at the same pace. When she was close enough that he could hear her clearly, she said, "You must be the eldest." He looked at her the way you look at weather coming in from the west. Not afraid, exactly, but measuring. "Yes, ma'am." "Tea," he said. She stopped at the gate and waited. He opened it without being asked. She noticed that, too. The house was 100 yards back from the fence line, set against a rise that would cut the worst of the winter wind. Practical placement. The porch needed work. 2 boards bowed in the middle, the railing on the left side lower than the right. But the windows were clean. That said something about whoever was responsible for them. "Your father home?" she asked. "In the barn. I was told to watch for you." She followed the path to the house. He walked a half-step behind, not leading, not lagging. She could feel him taking stock of her the way she was taking stock of everything around her. At the door, she stopped. Inside, she could hear them. Not one sound, but several. Something being dragged across a floor, a high voice, then a lower one, then quiet. The ordinary noise of a house that contained too many people and too little management. The boy opened the door for her. The smell hit her first, not bad exactly, but thin. The smell of a kitchen where no one had cooked anything with confidence in quite some time. There were 5 of them visible from the doorway. The youngest was sitting on the floor with a piece of rope she'd been tying into knots. A girl of maybe 4 with bare feet and her hair uncombed. She looked up at the woman without alarm and went back to her rope. The others ranged up from there. 2 more girls near the table. A boy younger than the eldest sitting on the stairs, and a very small boy of perhaps 3 standing in the center of the room, holding the sleeve of his own shirt with both hands as if steadying himself. Nobody said anything. She stepped inside. The kitchen was to the left. She walked to the doorway of it and looked. A pot on the stove, empty, a sack of cornmeal on the counter, a tin of lard, nearly spent, dried beans in a jar on the shelf, onions hanging from a hook by the window, 3 of them left. She set her bag down near the door. "When did you last eat?" she asked the eldest, who had followed her in. He hesitated in the way that meant he was deciding whether to minimize. "Yesterday noon, tea," he said. She turned back to the kitchen. She did not make any expression that they would need to manage. She looked at the beans, looked at the lard, looked at the cornmeal. Her eyes moved along the shelf, counting what was there. "Get your father tea," she said. The boy went. She rolled up her sleeves and reached for the pot. She filled the pot from the water barrel near the back door and set it over the heat. The beans would take too long tonight. She knew that before she touched the jar. She left them where they were and reached instead for the cornmeal and the lard. The small boy had drifted into the kitchen doorway. He still held his own sleeve. She did not tell him to move. She worked around him, finding a skillet on the nail above the stove, testing its weight, setting it on the second burner. She heard the man's boots before she saw him. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, and she felt the pause without turning around. He had come in quietly, the way men do when they are not sure what they are walking into. She spooned lard into the skillet. "There's enough for cornbread tonight," she said, "and I can stretch the onions into something. But tomorrow I'll need to go to the general store a moment. Then, all right, that was all. No apology for the bare shelves, no explanation. She respected that. She pulled the onions down from the hook and set 2 of them on the counter and put the third back, saving it. The eldest boy had appeared again in the doorway beside his father, watching her hands. "You can peel those," she said to him, and pointed to the onions. He came forward and did it. His hands were competent for a boy his age. She filed that away. The skillet heated. She mixed the cornmeal with water and a small scrape of the last lard and a pinch of salt she found in a clay dish near the back of the shelf. The 3 younger children had assembled at the table by some unspoken gravity, the way hungry children do when they smell something coming. The small one had finally let go of his sleeve. He was watching the skillet. She poured the first round of batter and listened to it settle against the iron. The man had not left. He was standing at the edge of the kitchen, not in it, one shoulder against the doorframe. She could see him at the corner of her vision. He was watching the children watch the stove. She did not look at him. She waited for the edges to set, then turned the first cake with the spatula she'd found hanging from the same nail as the skillet. "Plates, teas," she said to the eldest, and he knew where they were without being told. By the time the man's boots shifted and he moved to his place at the table, there were 5 cornbread cakes on a plate in the center of it, and she was already pouring the next round. The small boy put both hands flat on the table and leaned toward the plate. "Wait," said his brother. He waited. She turned the next cake. She finished the last round and set the skillet back on its hook. By then, every child had a plate in front of them, and the eldest had found a jar of molasses from somewhere and set it on the table without being asked. She did not ask where he'd found it. She sat at the end of the bench, the only space left, and took a small cornbread for herself, because not taking would have made something of the moment she didn't want made. The small boy poured molasses until his brother's hand covered the jar. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't need to. The sounds were the sounds of eating, the scrape of a fork, the soft knock of a cup set down, the youngest making a noise that was not quite a word, but was plainly satisfaction. Outside, the light had shifted to the low gold of late afternoon. A fly moved against the window glass and went still. The man ate the way he did most things, without excess. He did not watch her. He watched his children the way a man watches something he built that is still standing, checking without appearing to check. When the plate was empty, the eldest stood and took it to the dry sink without being told. She noticed that. The others stayed in their places, some of them tipping slightly with the particular heaviness that follows a meal eaten after hunger. The small one had molasses on his chin. She rose and wet the edge of a cloth in the water pail and crouched in front of him. He submitted to it the way children do, tolerant, briefly still, then pulling away before she was quite finished. She let him go. The man had pushed back from the table. His forearms were resting on his knees, and he was looking at the floor somewhere between his boots and the legs of the bench. Not brooding, just quiet in the way that has weight in it. "That jar's been in the cupboard since last spring," he said. She didn't answer right away. She folded the cloth and set it on the edge of the dry sink. "It held tea," she said. He looked up then, not quite at her. At the window, maybe, or the space above the children's heads, where the evening light was starting to go amber. "It did," he said. The eldest had come back to the table and was gathering the smaller children toward the door with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been the eldest for a long time. The small boy went last, pausing to look back at the stove as if confirming it was still there. The door swung open and the sound of the yard came in briefly. A dog, the creak of something wooden in the wind, and then swung mostly shut again. She and the man were left in the kitchen. Neither of them moved toward the door. The lamp on the table hadn't been lit yet. There was still enough light from the window to see by, but only just, and neither of them moved to correct it. She went to the stove and checked the damper out of habit. It didn't need adjusting, she adjusted it anyway. Behind her, she heard the bench shift slightly, his weight redistributing, but she didn't turn. "How long have you been without help?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. The way she said it made room for him not to answer if he didn't want to. He was quiet for a moment. 14 months. She nodded at the stove. "The youngest two don't really remember her," he said. "The older ones do, but they don't say so." She turned then and leaned against the dry sink with her arms crossed loosely, not closed off, just resting. He was still on the bench, forearms on his knees again. The amber in the window had deepened. The kitchen was going soft at the edges. "The boy," she said. "The one who keeps watching the stove." He looked up. "He does that every evening." She said. "Or has he always?" The man let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Since about March," he said. "When the cold started going, he'd come in and check it was still burning." He paused. "I don't think he's told anyone he does it." She said nothing. She understood the keeping of that kind of watch. The light through the window was nearly gone now. A thin stripe of orange at the horizon line, and then blue above it, going dark. She reached behind her without looking and found the matchbox on the shelf. She lit the lamp. The kitchen came back in warm yellow. He didn't leave. She didn't ask him to. There was a dish still in the basin. She washed it. He sat. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It had too much air in it for that. It was the kind of silence that forms between two people who have both been very alone for a while and have not yet decided what to do about the other person's presence. "The bread tea," he said finally. "Where'd you learn to make it like that?" "My mother." "Tea," she said. "She made it the same way every Saturday until I was 17. She set the dish in the rack. Then I made it." He nodded. "She died," she said, not offering it, just completing the sentence so it would be finished and not hovering. "I'm sorry, he said. She picked up the cloth again, folded it once, set it on the edge of the sink. "The children will sleep." "Teh," she said. It was almost a question, almost a way of asking what came next without asking. He stood, slowly like a man who has sat too long and knows it. They will, he said. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, for a moment longer than leaving required. His hand went to the frame, not gripping it, just resting there. She was already turning back to the counter. I'll check the well rope tomorrow. He said. It was fraying last week. She nodded. He went. She listened to his boots on the floor, then the sound of the back door, then nothing. The lamp threw the same light it had before, but the room felt larger somehow, the way rooms do after someone has been in them and gone. She dried her hands on the cloth she had already folded and unfolded it again, smoothing it flat against the counter's edge. In the morning, she was up before the children. She had been up before children for 6 weeks now, and the rhythm of it had settled into her the way new rhythms do, not naturally exactly, but without resistance. She built the fire, she put water on, she counted the eggs. 6 were enough if she stretched them with the dried onion. And she did. He had fixed the loose step off the back porch sometime in the night. She noticed it when she went to the pump for water. The board that had given softly underfoot every morning was solid now. She felt the absence of the give before she understood what had changed. She stood on it for a moment, just to confirm. Then she went to the pump. The children came down in the order they always did, the youngest first, which still surprised her, and the oldest last, quiet and private in the way of a boy who had taken on something too heavy and not yet found a place to set it down. He was 11. He moved through the kitchen like he was apologizing for existing in it, and she had noticed this for a week without knowing what to do about it. That morning she put his plate down and left a second piece of bread beside it without comment. He looked at it. He didn't say anything, but he ate it. She was at the table with the week's figures when she heard the step again from outside. 2 weights, his and then lighter, the youngest. The door opened and the boy came in first, carrying something in both hands with the gravity of a child, transporting something important. It was a handful of prairie asters. Late in the season, a little battered, the color of a pale sky just before evening. He held them out. She took them. She didn't make her face go soft at it. That would have embarrassed him. She just said, "Thank you," the way she would to anyone handing her anything. He seemed satisfied with that. He ran back outside. She looked at the flowers for a moment. Then she looked up through the window at the yard. He was standing by the fence post, hands in his pockets, watching the boy run back to wherever the others had gotten to. He wasn't looking at her. But he had been a moment ago. She'd caught the tail of it before he turned. She set the flowers in a tin cup with some water and put them on the windowsill. Then she went back to her figures. The numbers were fine, better than fine. She had started keeping a second column, not for the household but for the requests. Maud Alcott's husband needed a week of suppers while she recovered from a fall. The Hendersons' hired hand had asked, careful and embarrassed, if she ever sold bread. She'd given him a loaf and told him what it cost, and he'd come back the next day with coins in his palm and a look of relief that she filed away without comment. She was not thinking about what this meant. She was only watching what was happening and writing it down. That evening, he fixed the latch on the smokehouse door. She heard the hammer from the kitchen, steady and unhurried, the way he did everything. When it stopped, she counted to herself. 30 seconds, maybe 40. And then she heard him test it 3 times. Open, shut, open, shut, open, shut. She didn't go out. After supper, when the children were in bed and the kitchen had gone quiet, she found him at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil. He was writing slowly, which surprised her. She poured herself the last of the coffee and sat across from him without asking if he minded. He didn't look up. She watched his hand for a moment, the way he pressed the pencil, the deliberate way he formed each letter, like a man who had not written much and took it seriously because of that. She said, "Letter," he said, "to my brother. He's in Kansas," she nodded. She didn't ask more. He wrote another line. Then he stopped and looked at what he'd written, and something in his face changed. Not much, just a slight settling, like a man recalculating. He said, I told him things are working out here. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Outside, the wind had picked up. She could hear it moving through the grass on the far side of the house, that low, running sound like something passing through. She didn't say, are they? She didn't say anything. She just sat with her coffee while he finished his letter, and the candle between them threw their shadows up the wall, and the flowers on the windowsill held their pale color in the dark for a little while longer before the light gave out. The next morning she found the letter on the table, folded and sealed, with a coin set on top of it. She understood without being told. He wanted it posted when she went to the general store. She put the coin in her apron pocket and the letter in her basket alongside the flower list. The Harrigan boy was at the store with his mother, who looked at her basket and then at her and said something about the cold coming early this year. She agreed that it was. The woman lingered. She asked how the children were settling in school. She said they were settling fine. The woman nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are not quite finished with a thought, but have decided not to finish it out loud. She bought her flour and posted the letter and walked home. He was splitting wood when she came back. She could hear it from the road, the clean report of the axe, then a pause, then another. She didn't call out. She went inside and started the bread. The youngest had taken to sitting on the kitchen floor while she worked, not underfoot, just present. She had started bringing a small tin cup to fill with water, which she would carry very carefully to wherever she decided it needed to go. That morning she carried it to the window and set it on the sill beside the dried flowers, and then stood back and looked at the arrangement with the serious appraisal of someone who has completed an important task. She kept working the dough. She didn't say anything about the cup. Later, when the bread was in the oven and she was wiping down the table, she noticed that the flowers were not dried, not entirely. One of them had found some moisture, or the child had given it some, or she had been wrong about how far gone they were. A single stem had loosened enough to bend slightly toward the light, and at the end of it the petals, which she had thought were finished, had opened just a little more. She looked at it for a moment. She left it where it was. He came in at midday with the cold still on him. She had soup on. He washed at the basin and sat down, and they ate without much talking, the way they had learned to eat, not uncomfortably, not with effort, just with the particular ease of people who have stopped performing industry in each other's presence. The children came in from outside red-faced and loud, and then immediately quiet when they sat down, because that was how it went now. After the meal, he carried the bowls to the basin without being asked. She watched him do it. He didn't look back. He just washed them and set them to dry, and the afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and caught the steam rising off the water, and then was gone. That evening she found him in the barn. Not looking for him. She had gone to check on the mare, whose left foreleg had been tender since Tuesday, and she had brought a clean cloth and the liniment she kept on the shelf above the washboard. The lamp she carried threw a low circle of light ahead of her, and when she pushed the door open, he was there, at the far stall, crouched down with one hand flat against the mare's leg, his head tilted the way it went when he was reading something with his hands instead of his eyes. He looked up when she came in. She held up the cloth and the bottle without saying anything. He nodded and moved to give her room, but he didn't leave. He stayed just to one side, watching the way she worked, and she was aware of him watching but not bothered by it. She had been watched her whole life, and she knew the difference between the kind that assessed and the kind that simply paid attention. This was the second kind. She wrapped the legs slowly. The mare stood patient. Outside, the wind had come up again. She could hear it moving through the space between the barn boards, a low sound like something breathing. One of the younger children had left a pair of boots just inside the door, unlaced, tipped over against each other the way children's boots always fell, and the lamplight caught the mud dried on the soles. When she was done, she stood, and the mare shifted her weight carefully onto the leg, testing it, then settled. He said, "She'll be all right by the week's end." She said, "I know." Neither of them moved immediately. She became aware that they were standing closer than the task required. Not remarkably so, there was space enough between them, but close enough that she could hear him breathe when the wind outside paused. He was looking at the mare. She looked at the mare too. He said, "I've been thinking about the step at the back of the house." She said, "What about it?" He said it needed replacing, not just the board but the whole support beneath it, and he wanted to do it before the ground froze solid. He said it in the way he said things, flat, practical, the information and nothing attached to it. But she had been around him long enough now that she heard the shape of what was underneath, the way you hear weather coming before you see it. She said, "All right." He nodded. She picked up the lamp and the cloth and the bottle. He held the barn door open for her, and she walked through it and out into the cold dark, and he came behind her. And they walked back to the house together, without talking, their breath making small clouds that disappeared into the air ahead of them. He replaced the step on a Saturday while she was inside putting up the last of the preserves. She could hear him through the wall, the pull of old nails, the deliberate tap of the hammer finding its mark. None of the noise a man makes when he wants to be heard. Just the sound of the work itself. The children were in the yard. The youngest sat in the dirt near where he worked, not helping, not talking, just present in the way small children are present, wholly and without apology. He didn't send her inside. He handed her a nail to hold when he needed both hands free, and she held it with great seriousness. She watched through the window without meaning to. When he was done, he tested it twice with his boot, then a third time, set his hammer down, stood with his hands at his sides, and looked at what he had built in the plain way. He looked at things, not for approval, just to see if it was right. She brought coffee out a little later. He was crouched at the corner of the porch, checking the join. She set both cups on the railing where they could reach them and didn't say anything about the step. And he didn't say anything about the coffee. He stood and picked up his cup. She picked up hers. The light was going early. November had taken the gold out of everything and left it pale and clean. Across the yard, the horses stood at the fence, like they were watching something neither of them could see. He said, "Ground'll be too hard by next week to do much outside." She said, "There's plenty inside to last through winter." He said yes. The youngest came and pressed herself against the woman's leg. She put her hand on the child's head without thinking about it, just smoothed the hair back once, and the child stood there content, watching the horses. That was all. Winter came the way it comes in that country, not all at once but in increments, one cold morning following the next, until the cold was simply the air and you stopped noticing the adjustment. The house held, the stove drew well. The 6 children grew loud at meal times and quiet at night, and the table was always full. She had not meant for her life to look like this. She suspected he hadn't meant for his to either. But there is a thing that happens sometimes between people who have each been through enough. A kind of recognition that has nothing to do with intention. You look up one morning and find that you have been building something without deciding to, that the walls are up, that the roof holds, that the step at the back of the house is solid under your foot, that it will hold the winter.